The security guard's hands were shaking when he handed in his badge. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. 8 years of night shifts, only coming home when dawn was just breaking to turn the page to a new day and make breakfast, always stretching every dollar to make ends meet. The other guards used to tease him, the quiet guy who never joined their card games, who always rushed home the moment his shift ended. They didn't know about the little girl waiting for him, about the pink lunchbox he prepared every morning, about the parent-teacher meetings he never missed despite working all night. Tonight, he lost his job for one simple act, defending a woman in a janitor's uniform who was being yelled at by his supervisor. It seemed like nothing, just another nameless employee he would probably never see again. But that woman wasn't what she appeared to be, and his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Jake Morrison had worked security at Sterling Tower for 3 years. It wasn't the best job, but it was steady. And steady meant everything when you had an 8-year-old daughter counting on you. The building was one of those glass giants downtown, the kind that reflected clouds during the day and glowed like a beacon at night. Jake knew every corner of it, every squeaky door hinge, every camera blind spot that needed covering during his rounds. He worked the graveyard shift, 10 at night until 6 in the morning, which meant he saw the city at its quietest and came home when most people were just waking up. His daughter Lily was already awake when he opened the apartment door that morning. She was sitting at their small kitchen table, coloring in a workbook, her dark hair still messy from sleep. The moment she heard the door, she looked up and smiled, and Jake felt the exhaustion of the night shift fade just a little. She was wearing the purple pajamas he'd bought her last month, the ones with little stars on them that she said made her feel like an astronaut. Jake dropped his keys on the counter and walked over to ruffle her hair. She giggled and swatted his hand away, but her eyes were bright with happiness. This was their routine, every morning the same, and Jake wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. He moved to the stove and started making scrambled eggs. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms in an older building on the edge of the city, but it was theirs. The rent was manageable, barely, and the neighbors were quiet. Lily hummed softly as she colored, her legs swinging under the chair. Jake glanced at her and felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came every time he thought about how close he'd come to never knowing her. 8 years ago, he'd been working as a security guard at County General Hospital. It was winter, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and stayed there. He'd been doing his rounds outside the emergency entrance when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A cry, weak, barely there. He followed the sound and found a bundle near the side door, wrapped in a worn jacket that was far too thin for the weather. Inside was a newborn baby girl, her face red from crying, her tiny fists clenched. There was no note, no explanation. Just a child, abandoned in the freezing night. Jake had called the hospital staff immediately, and they'd taken her inside. The police were notified, child services got involved, and for weeks they searched for the mother or any family. No one came forward. The baby was placed in temporary foster care, but Jake couldn't stop thinking about her. He visited her whenever he could, holding her during his breaks, watching her sleep in the hospital nursery. Something about her pulled at him, something he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him that first night, her eyes wide and trusting even in the cold. Maybe it was the fact that she had no one else. 3 months later, Jake started the process to become her foster parent. It wasn't easy. He was single, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, working nights. Social workers came to inspect his home, asked questions about his finances, his background, his plans. But Jake was determined. He took parenting classes, rearranged his life, saved every penny. When Lily was 6 months old, she came home with him, and from that moment, she was his daughter. He never completed the formal adoption process. The legal fees were too high, the paperwork too complicated, and Jake kept telling himself he'd do it when he saved enough money. But the years passed, and there was always something else. Rent, groceries, medical bills, school supplies. Lily grew, and Jake loved her more every day. But in the back of his mind, there was always a fear. A fear that someone would come and say he didn't have the right to keep her, that he wasn't official enough, stable enough, good enough. He pushed the thought away as he plated the eggs and set them in front of Lily. She looked up at him with those big brown eyes and said, "Thank you, Dad." And just like that, the fear didn't matter. She called him Dad. That was all he needed. They ate breakfast together, talking about her homework and the book she was reading in class. Jake asked about her spelling test, and she proudly told him she'd gotten all the words right. He told her he was proud of her, and she beamed. These mornings were everything. After breakfast, Jake walked Lily to the bus stop 2 blocks away. She held his hand the whole way, chattering about her friend Sarah and the class pet hamster named Mr. Whiskers. When the bus arrived, she hugged him tight and climbed aboard, waving from the window as it pulled away. Jake waved back until the bus disappeared around the corner. Then he walked home, climbed into bed, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. It never did. His mind was too full of worries. Bills. Rent. Lily's growing feet that needed new shoes every few months. The fact that his car was making a strange noise he couldn't afford to fix. The knowledge that he was one emergency away from everything falling apart. Still, he closed his eyes and forced himself to rest. He had to be awake when Lily got home from school. That evening, Jake returned to Sterling Tower for another shift. The lobby was quiet, the marble floors gleaming under the overhead lights. His supervisor, Martin Cruz, was already there, barking orders at the evening crew as they clocked in. Martin was a large man, with a perpetual scowl and a voice that carried. He'd been with the company for 15 years, and never let anyone forget it. Jake nodded at him as he passed, but Martin barely acknowledged him. The night started like any other. Jake did his rounds, checked the doors, monitored the security cameras. Around midnight, he noticed someone new, a woman in a janitor's uniform, pushing a cart down one of the hallways on the 3rd floor. She looked young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her uniform was slightly too big, and she moved with a hesitance that suggested she was new. Jake made a mental note, but didn't think much of it. The cleaning company hired new people all the time. Around 2 in the morning, Jake was near the elevators when he heard raised voices. He turned and saw Martin standing in front of the new janitor, his face red with anger. The woman stood frozen, her hands gripping the handle of her cart. Martin's voice boomed through the hallway. "What do you think you're doing? You missed an entire floor. Do you even know how to do your job?" The woman opened her mouth to respond, but Martin cut her off. "I don't want excuses. If you can't handle this, maybe you should find work somewhere else." Jake felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen Martin berate people before, but there was something about the way the woman stood there, small and silent, that reminded him of Lily, of vulnerability, of someone just trying to get by. Before he could think better of it, Jake stepped forward. "Hey, Martin, take it easy." Martin turned to glare at him. "This doesn't concern you, Morrison." Jake kept his voice calm. "She's new. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe just show her what she missed instead of yelling." Martin's eyes narrowed. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Jake hesitated. He could feel the danger in the moment, the way the air seemed to tighten, but he couldn't back down now. "I'm just saying there's a better way to handle this." For a long moment, Martin stared at him. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You know what, Morrison? I'm tired of your attitude. You think you're some kind of hero? You're fired. Hand over your badge and get out." Jake's stomach dropped. He looked at Martin, then at the woman, who was staring at him with wide eyes. He wanted to argue, to fight back, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Martin had made up his mind. Slowly, Jake unclipped his badge from his belt and held it out. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. From exhaustion. From the weight of knowing he'd just lost the job that kept a roof over Lily's head. Martin snatched the badge and turned away. "Security will escort you out." Jake looked at the woman one more time. She was still staring at him, her face pale. He wanted to say something, to tell her it was okay, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he turned and walked toward the exit. Behind him, he heard her whisper, "I'm so sorry." But Jake didn't look back. He couldn't. He stepped out into the cold night air and felt the world tilt beneath him. He had no job, no plan, and Lily was counting on him. The woman in the janitor's uniform stood alone in the hallway, her heart pounding. She watched the security guard disappear through the doors, and guilt crashed over her like a wave. He'd lost his job because of her, because she'd been careless, because she'd drawn attention. She hadn't meant for any of this to happen. Her name wasn't really on the uniform she wore. Her real name was Victoria Sterling, and she owned the building. She owned the entire company, in fact, Sterling Industries, a tech conglomerate worth billions. But no one here knew that. Not Martin, not the other guards, not the cleaning staff. For the past 2 weeks, Victoria had been working undercover as a janitor, moving through her own building like a ghost. It was an experiment, one born out of desperation and loneliness. Victoria had spent her entire life in the world of wealth and power, raised by her adoptive father, Robert Sterling, to be the perfect heir. But perfection came at a cost. She'd never been allowed to be a child, never been allowed to make mistakes or show weakness. Robert had found her as a baby, abandoned just like she'd later learned so many others were. But instead of giving her love, he'd given her expectations. He molded her into a CEO before she was old enough to understand what that meant. And now, at 32, Victoria was successful, powerful, and utterly alone. She didn't know who loved her for herself and who loved her for her money. Every relationship felt transactional, every friendship conditional. So she'd decided to strip away the wealth, the title, the name, and see what was left. She wanted to know what it felt like to be ordinary, to be invisible. And for 2 weeks, it had worked. No one looked twice at her. No one cared. Until tonight. Until that security guard, Jake, she'd heard Martin call him, had stepped in to defend her. He didn't know who she was. He had no reason to help her. And yet he had. And now he was gone. Victoria stood there for a long moment, staring at the doors he'd walked through. Then she made a decision. She needed to know more about Jake Morrison. She needed to understand why he'd done what he did. And maybe, just maybe, she needed to make things right. The next morning, Victoria sat in her real office, a sprawling space on the top floor of Sterling Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was back in her usual clothes now, a tailored suit that cost more than most people made in a month. Her assistant, a sharp woman named Rachel, stood across from her, holding a tablet. "I need you to pull the employee file for someone," Victoria said. "Jake Morrison. He was a security guard on the night shift." Rachel nodded and tapped on the tablet. A moment later, she looked up. "Found him. Worked here for 3 years. Terminated last night for insubordination." Victoria's jaw tightened. "What else?" Rachel scrolled through the file. "Single. Lives on the east side. No listed dependents." Victoria frowned. "No dependents? Are you sure?" Rachel double-checked. "That's what the file says. Why?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, thinking. She remembered the way Jake had looked when he'd stood up to Martin. Tired, worn down, like someone carrying a heavy weight. There was something the file wasn't telling her. She dismissed Rachel and picked up her phone, dialing a number she rarely used. A private investigator answered on the second ring. Victoria didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I need you to look into someone. Jake Morrison. I want to know everything. Where he lives, what he does, who he's connected to, and I need it by tonight." The investigator agreed, and Victoria hung up. She turned to look out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Jake was waking up to a life without a job, and it was her fault. That afternoon, Victoria received the report. She read it in silence, her eyes moving over the details. Jake Morrison, 35 years old, worked multiple jobs before landing at Sterling Tower. No criminal record, no family listed in official documents. But there was one detail that caught her attention, a note from the investigator. Subject lives with a child, female, approximately 8 years old. Relationship unclear. No records of marriage or biological children. Victoria's breath caught. A child. Jake had a child. But the file said no dependents. Why would he hide that? She kept reading, and the answer unfolded in fragments. 8 years ago, Jake had been working at County General Hospital. A newborn baby girl was found abandoned outside the building. The case was investigated, but no family was located. The child was placed in foster care. 6 months later, Jake Morrison applied to become a foster parent. The application was approved, and the child was placed in his care. But there was no record of a completed adoption, no legal finalization. The investigator had included a note at the end. Subject appears to be raising the child as his own, but legal status is uncertain, likely unable to afford formal adoption process. Victoria set the report down and stared at it. Jake hadn't hidden his daughter out of shame. He'd hidden her because he was protecting her, because he was afraid. And now he'd lost his job, the job that kept her fed, clothed, safe. Victoria closed her eyes and felt the weight of it. She'd lived her whole life surrounded by wealth, but she'd never understood what it meant to struggle, to choose between paying rent and buying groceries, to love someone so much you'd sacrifice everything for them. Jake had done that. He'd taken in a child who wasn't his, raised her alone, worked nights to give her a life, and he'd lost it all because he'd defended a stranger. Victoria opened her eyes. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could do something else. Over the next few days, Victoria continued her investigation, but this time it wasn't through reports or files. She followed Jake. She saw him leave his apartment in the morning, walking a little girl to the bus stop. The girl had dark hair and a bright smile, and she held Jake's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Victoria watched from a distance as Jake waved goodbye to the bus, his shoulders slumping the moment it was out of sight. She followed him as he went from place to place, looking for work, a convenience store, a warehouse, a construction site. Every time the answer was the same: not hiring. Or worse, sorry, we need someone who can start immediately, and your background check will take too long. Victoria saw the way his jaw tightened, the way he forced himself to keep moving, even when it was clear he was running out of options. She saw him stop at a grocery store and stand in front of the shelves, counting change in his hand, before putting back a carton of milk and choosing the cheaper one. It was such a small thing, but it broke something inside her. That evening, Victoria sat in her car outside Jake's apartment building. She didn't know what she was doing anymore. This had started as curiosity, as guilt, but it had become something else. She was seeing a version of life she'd never known existed, a version where love wasn't about what you could buy or who you could impress. It was about showing up, about sacrifice, about holding someone's hand and making them feel safe. Victoria had never felt that. Not once. And watching Jake with his daughter, she realized how much she'd missed. Her phone buzzed. It was Rachel, asking about a meeting tomorrow. Victoria ignored it. She couldn't think about board meetings and quarterly reports right now. All she could think about was the man in that apartment who'd given up everything for a child who wasn't even his by blood, and the little girl who called him Dad. 3 days after Jake lost his job, he finally found work. It was a warehouse job on the other side of town, loading trucks and moving inventory. The pay was less than half of what he'd been making, and the hours were brutal. But it was something. Jake took it without hesitation. He couldn't afford to be picky. The first week was hell. His back ached from lifting boxes, his hands were covered in cuts and scrapes, and he came home so exhausted he could barely stand. But Lily never saw that. When he walked through the door, he smiled. He asked about her day, helped with her homework, made dinner. He tucked her into bed and told her stories until she fell asleep. And then, he collapsed onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering how much longer he could keep this up. On the 8th day, everything fell apart. Lily woke up with a fever. Jake pressed his hand to her forehead and felt the heat radiating from her skin. She was shivering, her face pale, her eyes glassy. He gave her medicine and told her to rest, but by the afternoon, she was worse. Her temperature spiked, and she started crying, saying her head hurt. Jake didn't hesitate. He scooped her up and carried her to the car, driving to the nearest urgent care clinic. The waiting room was crowded, but Jake didn't care. He held Lily in his lap, whispering to her that everything would be okay. When they finally called her name, the doctor examined her and said she needed to go to the hospital. Possible infection. They needed to run tests. Start an IV, keep her overnight for observation. Jake's heart sank. He nodded and followed the ambulance to the hospital, his mind racing. He didn't have insurance. He'd lost it when he lost his job at Sterling Tower, and the warehouse didn't offer benefits. The hospital bill was going to destroy him. But none of that mattered. Lily mattered. At the hospital, they admitted her to a room and started treatment. Jake sat beside her bed, holding her small hand in his. She drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing shallow. The nurse came in to check on her, adjusting the IV and making notes on a chart. When she left, Jake leaned his head against the side of the bed and closed his eyes. He didn't know how he was going to pay for this. He didn't know how he was going to keep going. But he would, because Lily needed him. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Jake dozed off in the chair, his hand still holding Lily's. He woke to the sound of footsteps and looked up to see someone standing in the doorway. It was the woman from Sterling Tower, the janitor. She wasn't wearing her uniform now. She was dressed in plain clothes, jeans, a sweater, a coat. Her hair was down, and she looked different, cleaner, more put together. Jake blinked, confused. "What are you doing here?" Victoria stepped into the room, her eyes on Lily. "I heard what happened. I wanted to help." Jake's confusion deepened. "How did you even know?" Victoria hesitated. "I've been keeping an eye on you. After what happened at the tower, I felt responsible." Jake stared at her. "You don't owe me anything." Victoria looked at him, and for the first time, Jake saw something raw in her expression. "Yes, I do." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This should cover the hospital bill, and anything else she needs." Jake looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "I can't accept that." Victoria set it on the table beside the bed. "You don't have a choice. She needs care, and you can't afford it. So let me help." Jake wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully now, and felt the fight drain out of him. He was so tired. So tired of pretending he had everything under control. Victoria pulled a chair up beside him and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jake said quietly, "She's not my daughter. Not biologically." Victoria nodded. "I know." Jake looked at her, surprised. "How?" Victoria met his eyes. "I had you investigated." I needed to understand why you did what you did. Why you helped me." Jake's jaw tightened. "So you know everything." Victoria shook her head. "I know the facts, but I don't understand. Why would you take in a baby you didn't know? Why would you give up your life for her?" Jake looked at Lily, and his expression softened. "Because she needed someone. And I needed her too." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "Your father," Jake interrupted. "I didn't have a father. I grew up in foster care, bounced around from house to house until I aged out at 18. I know what it's like to feel like no one wants you. I couldn't let her go through that." Victoria stared at him, and something inside her cracked. "I was abandoned too," she said quietly. Jake looked at her, surprised. Victoria nodded. "When I was a baby, someone left me outside a church. A man named Robert Sterling found me. He adopted me, raised me." Jake waited, sensing there was more. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "But he didn't love me. He raised me to be useful, to be his legacy. I had everything, money, education, opportunities. But I never had what she has." She gestured to Lily. "I never had someone look at me the way you look at her." Jake was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Love isn't about blood. It's about choice. I chose her. Every day, I choose her." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She'd spent her whole life searching for something she couldn't name. And now, sitting in this hospital room with a man who had nothing but gave everything, she finally understood what it was. It was this: connection, sacrifice, love that didn't ask for anything in return. She wiped her eyes and stood. "I need to tell you something." Jake looked up at her, waiting. Victoria took a deep breath. "My name isn't Anna. It's Victoria Sterling. I own Sterling Industries. I own the building where you worked." Jake's eyes widened. "What?" Victoria nodded. "I was working undercover. I wanted to see what my company was really like, what people were really like. And you," her voice broke, "you defended me. You lost everything because of me." Jake sat back, stunned. He didn't know what to say. Victoria continued. "I can't take back what happened, but I can make it right. I'm offering you a job, a real one, head of security. Better pay, benefits, everything you need. And I'll help you finalize the adoption for Lily. I'll cover the legal fees, all of it." Jake shook his head. "I don't want charity." Victoria stepped closer. "This isn't charity. You showed me something I'd been searching for my whole life. You showed me what it means to be human, to care about someone more than yourself. Let me do this. Please." Jake looked at her, then at Lily. He thought about the years of struggle, the fear, the exhaustion. He thought about the little girl who called him Dad, and he thought about the fact that, for the first time, someone was offering him a way out. Not because they pitied him, but because they respected him. He nodded slowly. "Okay." 6 months later, Jake stood in a courtroom, his heart pounding. Lily sat beside him, wearing a new dress Victoria had bought her. The judge looked at the paperwork in front of him, then at Jake, then at Lily. He smiled. "Mr. Morrison, I'm pleased to grant your petition for adoption. Lily is officially your daughter." Jake felt tears streaming down his face. Lily threw her arms around him, and he held her tight, burying his face in her hair. It was done. She was his. Legally, officially, forever. Victoria stood in the back of the courtroom, watching. She smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. After the hearing, they went to a diner to celebrate. Lily ordered pancakes with extra syrup, and Jake laughed as she got it all over her face. Victoria sat across from them, watching the easy way they interacted, the love that radiated between them. She'd spent months getting to know them, and in that time, something had shifted inside her. She'd started making changes at Sterling Industries, spending more time with employees, listening to their concerns, treating them like people instead of assets. She'd even reached out to a private investigator to find information about her birth mother. She didn't know if she'd find anything, but for the first time, she wanted to try. As they left the diner, Lily grabbed Jake's hand, then reached for Victoria's. Victoria looked down, surprised, but Lily just smiled up at her. "Come on," Lily said. "Dad promised to take me to the park." Victoria looked at Jake, and he nodded. Together, the three of them walked down the street, Lily swinging between them. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the city. Victoria thought about her life before, the emptiness, the loneliness, the endless searching. And she thought about now, about this strange, unexpected family she'd found. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. They reached the park, and Lily ran ahead, laughing. Jake and Victoria followed, side by side. "Thank you," Jake said quietly. Victoria shook her head. "I should be thanking you. You taught me what really matters." Jake smiled. "What's that?" Victoria watched Lily climb onto the swings, her face bright with joy. "That love isn't something you buy. It's something you give." Jake nodded, and for a moment they just stood there, watching Lily play. Then Victoria said, "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime, the three of us." Jake looked at her, surprised. Then he smiled. "I'd like that," Lily called out to them, waving from the top of the slide. Jake and Victoria walked over together, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them stayed in the park, laughing and playing. A little family built not on blood or money, but on choice, on love, on the simple truth that sometimes the people who save you are the ones you never expected. And sometimes, in helping a stranger, you find the person you've been searching for all along.